I've dug deep into the law, studied the Second Coming, stayed up all night with Calvinism, and even experienced the Holy Spirit firsthand. And after going through every single one of those stages, the final conclusion that remained was just one sentence. Simple enough for a child to understand. This video is not about a perfect believer teaching you the right answers. It's the story of someone who was crushed under the law, obsessed with end-time dates, whose head grew big with doctrine, and who rode the emotional roller coaster of spiritual experiences, and how that person finally grasped the most essential truth of faith. I went through every stage of my faith journey, and I want to share with you the one sentence I arrived at in the end. Stay until the end, and you'll find out what that sentence is. First, I want to address something. Have you ever thought, theology is for pastors, it has nothing to do with me? I thought that for a long time too, but that's simply not true. The moment a person believes in God, we all become theologians. That's not a grand statement. It simply means that thoughts about God, thoughts you'd never had before, start forming in your mind. What kind of God is He? Why did He allow this in my life? The accumulation of those questions is theology. So if you're watching this video right now, you're already doing your own theology. And here's the interesting thing. Theology doesn't stay in one place. It keeps changing. It keeps expanding. Sometimes it goes completely off track. Over the past 30-something years, I've lost count of how many times my image of God has changed. I'm going to share the actual road I walked. Nothing left out, not even the embarrassing parts. I believe the place I arrived at after all that wandering will be genuinely helpful to anyone who feels lost right now. I had absolutely no Christian background. My faith began inside a university campus ministry. Looking back, I'm truly grateful. That's where I built the basic framework of my faith, and I developed the good habit of reading one chapter of the Bible every day in quiet time. But if I'm honest, my faith back then was still tied to rules. What I mean is, I wasn't encountering God directly. I was learning about Him indirectly, leaning on the faith of the seniors and leaders who guided me. If a leader said, pray like this, I prayed like that. If they said, don't do this, I didn't. It felt like God was grading me, like He'd smile when I did well, and His face would fall when I didn't. Some of you might know this feeling, missing Sunday service and feeling guilty, falling behind on quiet time and thinking God must be disappointed in you, sharing the gospel out of obligation rather than love. I lived in that state for quite a long time, not as a life of faith, but as a life of religion. My direct personal encounter with God came much later, but I have no regrets. I believe that first season was when the foundational framework of my faith was firmly established. Then one day, 18 years into my faith, I collided head-on with a single verse. Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. I had memorized this verse. I had read and meditated on it hundreds of times in Bible study. But that day was different. Suddenly this thought struck me. My entire faith up to that point had been lived with me as the main character. Because my faith started from me, I had to carry all the responsibility. All those years of gritting my teeth, trying not to disappoint God. Looking back, I wonder how I survived. But Galatians 2:20 was saying the exact opposite. It was saying I had already died, and the one now living inside me wasn't me. It was Jesus. The main character was no longer me. It was Him. After grasping this, my faith completely flipped. Before and after, 180 degrees. For the first time, I tasted a freedom I had never felt before. I was no longer living a life of endurance, but a life of surrender. I thought I had finally found the answer to all my years of wandering. But knowing this truth in my head and having it become real in my life, those were two very different things. I kept finding myself collapsing again and again before the deep-rooted sinfulness within me, and I fell into a despair and thirst even deeper than before. That's when I turned my eyes in a completely unexpected direction. It was around 2015. This time, my eyes were open to the faith of the Second Coming. I encountered end times teachings for the first time, and they were remarkably clear. It felt like scattered pieces of the Bible were suddenly clicking into place, and above all, a burning longing rose up in me to cherish Jesus who is coming again, like waiting for a bridegroom. That heart itself was truly precious. But as time went on, problems began to surface. My attention kept drifting to the wrong things. Who is the Antichrist? When is the rapture? What signs mean the end is near? I was pouring all my energy into calculating and debating these things. Then one day it hit me. The one who is actually coming back is Jesus. And yet, I had let all these peripheral things steal my gaze. I sensed that I was heading off course. This season held some precious learning, but it wasn't where I was meant to stay. Next came Calvinism. I stumbled across it on YouTube, and I found myself face to face with the deep truth of God's absolute sovereignty and predestination. I was overwhelmed by the grace of a God who had chosen me before the foundation of the world, and for years I was soaked in that sovereign grace. But here too, there was a wall I couldn't get past. The more I emphasized God's sovereignty, the more I got stuck on double predestination, the idea that God had predetermined who would be saved and who would be condemned. I couldn't move forward. So I moved again. This time, I encountered a stream that emphasized the gifts and experiences of the Holy Spirit. During the COVID years, I directly experienced the supernatural work of God and felt, truly, viscerally, that God is alive. It was like meeting with my whole body the God I had only known in my head. But there was a trap here too. When you get lost in experiences, emotions become the whole of your faith. On good days, my faith and assurance overflowed, and on days with no feeling, everything crumbled. By this point, I was getting tired. The law, Galatians 2:20, the Second Coming, Calvinism, the Holy Spirit. 5 shifts, and every single time I'd said, "This is it," I'd hit a wall again. What's the problem? Why do I keep wandering? And then one day, exhausted, I found the answer in the most unexpected place. I was studying 1 John one day when, very quietly, a realization came. All the roads I had traveled, they had all been a journey toward one single truth. The law, the freedom of Galatians 2:20, the hope of the Second Coming, the sovereignty of God in Calvinism, the living experience of the Holy Spirit. All of it had been windows shining light on one single truth from different angles. God is love. That was all. That was truly everything. Does that sound too obvious? Too anticlimactic? Even someone walking into church for the very first time knows that. But it took me 30 years of wandering before this sentence came alive inside me. Knowing something in your head and knowing it through decades of lived experience, the weight of those two things cannot be compared. And there is a place where this love is most perfectly revealed. I call it the New Covenant. Does that sound complicated? Let me put it simply. The New Covenant is a promise God made unilaterally. It is not built on my effort, my faithfulness, my tears. It is an eternal promise built on the unconditional agape love that Jesus demonstrated on the cross. Which means I am no longer a sinner groveling to win God's approval. I am a new creation, made righteous in Jesus, united with the triune God. The freedom I tasted in Galatians 18 years ago, it was actually completed here, inside the New Covenant. At this point, there's something I really want to say to you. I am not saying which theology is right and which is wrong. I'm not here to criticize the law or say Calvinism was too narrow. It's actually the opposite. Every road I traveled was necessary. Not one of them was wasted. Because of the law, I learned the importance of grace. Because of the faith of the Second Coming, I held on to hope. Because of Calvinism, I learned to humbly acknowledge God's sovereignty. And because of the Holy Spirit, I came to know that there is a dimension of God that transcends both reason and emotion. It was only because I opened those windows one by one that I was finally able to truly see the unconditional love of God spread out magnificently beyond them. From now on, for the rest of my life, I intend to hold on to just two questions. First, who is God? Second, who am I? God is unconditional love who embraces me exactly as I am. And I am a new creation, fully united with God in that love. These two sentences are enough. This is the conclusion of my life, arrived at after 30 years of wandering. I have a dream to slowly open the pages of all 66 books of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, meditating carefully on each and every verse, and drawing out the living water of God's unconditional love flowing through them all. And to quietly pour that living water out to those who don't yet know God's love, and to those who know it but have misunderstood it as conditional love and have gone into hiding. This is the journey I intend to walk through the New Covenant column. Will you walk it with me? Turn on subscribe and notifications so you'll be the first to receive the next letter when it arrives. God's unconditional love. It hasn't even begun yet.